All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, cable news has been hyperventilating literally every day about Trump since before he was elected. Some of it justified: corporate tax cuts, institutionalized cruelty at the border, the nearly getting us into a war with Iran, the horrific COVID response as some examples. But quite a lot of it has been pretty unhinged. Obviously, the Russiagate obsession turned the entire Democratic Party into a bunch of conspiracy theorists who see Kremlin influence around every corner. The Byzantine diplomatic quarrel of Ukraine-gate was hyped as such a grave threat to our republic that they actually put the entire country through the torturous process of impeachment when we knew from the beginning what would happen. And of course, the endless hand-wringing over norms and guardrails and how we'll never be as respected abroad again has filled many an MSNBC hour. When you start the presidency by proclaiming that Trump is literally Hitler and literally a fascist and literally Mussolini, you don't have many ways to really up the rhetorical ante. When every day Trump's actions pose a supposedly existential threat to the republic, even your most enthusiastic cheerleaders will eventually fatigue and grow numb to that day's unprecedented threat. And when you find yourself in a situation, as we did this week, where Trump's words truly were unprecedented, where his actions really did recall dictatorial strongmen, where he really did directly invoke some of the totems of a proto-fascist movement, no language is really left to describe it. When they've faked outrage so many times, they don't seem to know how to do real shock and real outrage any longer. They're left with no way to signal that this time is different. And this time really is different. One of the foundational rights of our society is our First Amendment right to speak, to protest. It's a right that thousands are in the streets exercising every day, right now as we speak. And it's why I actually defended the right-wing reopen protesters, even as many on the left were outraged by their mid-COVID rallies. I don't typically pay much attention to Trump's tweets because they don't tend to amount to much more than fuel for a day's fake outrage cycle. But after midnight on last Friday, he sent a tweet that was chilling at the time and has only become more so. After calling the Minneapolis protesters thugs, he wrote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Now, many have pointed to the ugly history of that phrase. Who knows if Trump knew that history to wield it in that intentional of a way. But it certainly foreshadowed the events that would unfold just days later. With millions watching live on TV, Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr gave the order to crush the peaceful protesters and forcibly remove them from Lafayette Park outside the White House. Military police and Secret Service and park police with riot shields and horses began aggressively advancing on protesters who were peaceably chanting. They deployed tear gas, shot rubber bullets, launched flashbang grenades, bashed protesters and journalists and church ladies alike. We watched this violent assault on a split screen with the president's Rose Garden dress in which he claimed to support peaceful protesters, but threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in order to flood our cities with active duty military over the objections of local officials. And anyone who believes, watching that unfold, that Trump would use this military presence to carefully distinguish between the good actors and the bad and to protect the right to protest, you'd have to be a fool. Even as he mouthed the words of support for those peaceful protesters, heavily armed military police were crushing them before our very eyes. There is simply no doubt that a Trump Insurrection Act deployment would lead to more violence, not less. As Glenn Greenwald put it, unleashing the U.S. military against U.S. citizens on our streets after they bombarded peaceful protesters with tear gas to deny their right to assemble is the worst and most menacing event in the last 3.5 years. The premise is the police have been insufficiently forceful. Or as Kyle Kulinski put it in what's a pretty dramatic statement given his opposition to Biden, deploying the U.S. military domestically and eliminating our most precious freedoms protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution is a game changer. It is authoritarian, un-American, and on this, there is zero equivalence between the two candidates. Later in the night, we got a taste in military-occupied D.C. of what that fully militarized approach might look like. Police chased down and gassed more peaceful protesters for daring to violate curfew. Helicopters flew low in a tactic that is typically used to menace insurgents in places like Afghanistan. Think about that. They used the same method on civil rights protesters as they used on the Taliban. Just take a look. As Trump's former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, put it, we must reject any thinking of our cities as a battle space that our uniformed military is called upon to dominate. At home, We should use our military only when requested to do so on very rare occasions by state governors. Militarizing our response, as we witnessed in Washington, D.C., sets up a conflict, a false conflict between the military and civilian society. It erodes the moral ground that ensures a trusted bond between men and women in uniform and the society they are sworn to protect and of which they themselves are a part. Keeping public order rests with civilian, state, and local leaders who best understand their communities and are answerable to them. We should all be horrified by the casual conflation of American protesters with terrorists. We should be horrified by Trump's casual willingness to send active duty troops into American cities in order to protect the sanctity of the shops on Fifth Avenue. And spare me your concern trolling about small businesses when nearly every politician in the city sat by during COVID and watched while 40% of them had their operations permanently go up in smoke. Nothing I have witnessed in Trump's time in office has made me more fearful of what another 4 years under him could mean. Democrats who have let their Trump derangement syndrome run wild and the pundit class who had a meltdown every day may not have had the words to explain how different and how shocking this moment was, but they didn't have to because we could all watch it live for ourselves. We'll have more Rising for you after this.